I have just read possibly the best book of the year. It's not even out yet, and it's a debut, which is CRY VOIDBRINGER by Elaine Ho, which comes out end of October in America and early November in UK. My copy says 6th of November. What is CRY VOIDBRINGER about? You have these children that are godchildren that are converted for their power. There is this one godchild who is found in this carriage, being taken from one country to another as she's stolen from her home. And she is meek, abused, kind of scared. She's only a 13-year-old child. Our character Hammer takes her in, and then it's forced under her own queen and the authority she is forced to follow to take her in and to sort of look out for the signs of her godlike power. But the trouble is, most of the time with this godlike power, it doesn't amount to anything, and if it doesn't really amount to much power, they end up killing her. But this child is clever enough to know this, and throughout the course of this novel, Hammer is a very stoic character, and this godchild is weaving her way under her walls, and then Hammer ends up caring for this godchild and is now almost against everybody in the entire world to try and protect her. That's the bare bones of what this book is about. It's far, far more than that. The world is just so expansive and gritty, but not gritty. You have multiple continents. One who is like, I don't want to say Tivu, I think, who is the big empire of the world, who is almost getting all the power, and everybody else around them are smaller and don't have enough power of them. Then you have the world where Hammer is in at the moment, who their derelict, their ruling system and their monarchy is under the charge of a very, very meek and very, very not good queen. But they are very harsh people. These are the people who trained the Faceless, and the Faceless are the people who are taken from other countries and continents, children, and beaten into to be an assassin, and they are not allowed their names anymore. They go by the weapons that they choose, and it's this cycle of abuse from people who aren't even from their continent, and they're forced to stay there, and they will never be recognized as anyone but you're just faceless. This is just who you are. Nobody really cares. And then you have the godchildren, who over the years, less and less is happening. And you have these stories of these gods that are kind of woven out through the stories. You kind of get a hint of who these gods are, and especially towards the end of the book. And with that, is you understand these god people are choosing children to kind of give them their power. And through that power can come immense power. That doesn't quite make sense, but I think you kind of get what I mean. It's interesting how all of these kind of weave together, and how one particular god hasn't chosen a child in centuries. And I do like it. I like how the world building is just throughout this, and how it's crafted, and people are sort of deep-seated in prejudice, and I almost want to say racism, but I don't know if I'm putting too much of a heavy weight on what is actually in this book, because I don't really want to say that's the core of what this book is. Although there are a couple of things that happens, like again with people stealing from from other countries to train the Faceless, and they just don't see anything wrong with that. And they're sort of beating out their own culture in a sense. But then we have our characters, and immediately I fell in love with this book because of the characters. I opened this page and immediately Hammer sold my heart. She is hard as nails, sarcastic on a lot of things, but not overdone. And I'm not like other girls type of vibe. It's done subtly enough, or with a couple of barbs that you understand, oh, this is who she is as a character. And she kind of has no fucks at all. All she wants when you open this book is she wants to go home to the hut that she built herself, because being faceless and not giving anything, so she spent the few credits that she gets given on building this hut for herself, which is one room, and to be warm and to sleep. And she's in the mud trying to get this cargo from Tivu, and it just being in her head and hearing her complain about that, and then just being like, oh, I'm fed up of this sort of quiet work, gets a hammer out and just Hulk smash. Yeah, I do. I really like it, especially as a woman who's wielding a hammer as a weapon. I feel like you don't see that a lot, and especially with like the strength she has to wield it at the same time. It was just absolutely brilliant. But there's more to Hammer than that. You know, she does care, but the reason why she's hard as she is because she's been hurt in the past and she doesn't want to be anymore. So that's kind of where this is going from with Hammer. And then we meet Viri. Viri is the godchild who is in the carriage in the opening chapter, and she's a scared little 13-year-old child, and she knows some things, and she's sort of opening up a little bit, but she realizes that the people all around her, even her parents, which, by the way, 2 fathers, that doesn't happen. Like, what? This is, it's so inclusive in this book. Okay, not so inclusive, but like that little aspect of it, I was like, okay, I kind of want to see more of this. But even them, who they weren't really there for her, or, you know, one is gone because of how she was taken, he was killed during that. The other one isn't really there enough for her. And then she meets Hammer, and she's like, oh, Hammer is always there. She always comes back. So she's latching onto Hammer and is doing everything with Hammer, even when the queen-like person in this world, on like this derelict continent, who is not a very good queen, who is horrible in and of herself, she is then using Viri when she discovers what power Viri has. Viri is still latching on to Hammer, and they are using that to manipulate Viri, which is just like, she's a child. She's a child with such destructive magic that is just what is going on, and this child is being changed, and it's very much, you see through Viri the way that her innocence is just taken because of everything that has happened to her, and it's done expertly well on the playback of that, on being Viri, and Viri having to grow up older than her years far quicker than she had to. Then we have another character who is Nyas, who at first I wasn't too sold on her, but she got more interesting as we went through the book. She is another faceless, but the difference with her is she has woven her way into the queen's bed. She wasn't the queen at the time, she was the princess, but then her father died, so then she became the queen. But because she spent the last 10 years woving her way into this princess's bed, she is then raised up to be out of the faceless, but to be an advisor. But the trouble is with the faceless, they are branded with a mark on their forehead to brand them as faceless. So even if they remove their masks, you still see them as faceless. And even though she is the now queen's advisor, people are still not wanting to pay attention to her, to listen to her. They want her cast out because she was a faceless, and they treat faceless as nothing. But it's very interesting to see how Nyas is trying to cling to power through this queen who she is in the relationship with. And this queen is professing that she is in love with Nyas all the time. But there are instances where she dismisses Nyas's like culture, inheritance, where she was born, and is doing things because, again, this queen starts out as meek and horrible and doesn't know what she's doing, is very like against standing up, has been verbally abused by her own father, who is now dead, and is now thrust upon with this power. But then she's rising up out of that meekness, out of that I can't stand, you know, when people start shouting, she will curl in a ball and just freeze instead of actually doing something and standing up for yourself. But she comes out of that, and it's almost like she is then becoming a worse tyrant than her father was, because she's trying to be an assertive queen, but the only way she knows how to do that is what her father did. And her father ruled through fear and abuse and everything, and now she's trying to do that, whereas Nyas has been like, but you promised me you weren't going to use violence all the time, because all Nyas wants is just a life where she isn't forced to be a faceless and to kill. But the queen decides she wants to go to Haskell and retake that city that she used to own, or that her father used to own back in his prime. But things happened with other continents that made them go so derelict to the point where they're living is in a leaky roof, a leaky place that the roof can't even fix. They don't have a lot of money, they don't have a lot of trade. They are literally on the cusp of their whole continent and country just being disappearing, because they don't have any influence, power, there's nothing, anyway, that kind of vibe. So she decides to go do this, and Nice is like, oh, okay, like she can't really persuade her out of it. So she ends up going, and as they are on this trip, as they get to Haskell, as everything's starting to come together a little bit, and Nyas is losing a little bit more grip on this queen, more and more and more as they go through. And as you are watching this, and then the queen discovers Viri and her power, and how much she's using this such destructive power of this child and is chaining, like all these godchildren are literally in chains. They are slaves. They are not allowed to do anything. She doesn't look at Faceless as being anything but human, but then she will say to Nias, who she professedly loves, that, oh, I care about you, I love you, but the actions are not showing through that. And it's just seeing Nias desperately trying to cling to that hope that this queen will dig her out of the hole that their country put her and her people in the first place, is fascinating, and how it happened. And I loved her character going through this, and to the end was just brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And how it all came to a conclusion, especially within their relationship, was just on point. Absolutely loved it. And there are points in this, there was a romance in this as well, on not necessarily the toxic relationship romance that is between the queen and Nias, but there was more romance in this. It had me literally in tears coming to the end of it, even though I knew this was going to happen, but knowing it was going to happen and knowing how it happened was completely different. And the horrifying aspect of how this particular thing happened, that made me literally sobbing. I was like, what the fuck, man? It was so well done, and the implications it has on all characters, and seeing Hammer again at the beginning not wanting this child, to doing everything she can and caring for this child, to something else I can't say because that is a massive spoiler, and what happens and how everything goes, and the implications especially on Viri as well, like her and her emotional like trauma and distress and being that from beginning to the end of this book, and how it ended, and the relationship between everybody within this is just fraught and frayed and full of layers, and it's complicated, and it isn't so simple as it's just not simple. And then seeing how it started from the beginning to how it got to this point and how effortlessly it was done was just, oh my, I'm just in complete awe. I was addicted to this book. I read this in 3 days. I could not put this down. And the ending of this book is one of my favourite tropes, and I cannot tell you what it is because it's a big spoiler, but it is a favourite trope. I don't really know if it has an actual name, but it is kind of a favourite trope of mine, and I'm just addicted, and I need the rest of the series right now. Any special edition book box who's watching this, give me these special editions. It took me by storm, this book, and everything, and how it concluded was just perfect and left me gasping for more. I can't really tell you any more about this without talking about the actual spoilers in this book, but it's not out yet, so I want everybody to go read it and come back to me when you've read it, because I have so many thoughts on this book. I'm blown away by how good it was, the writing that was effortless, the character moments that were done in this, that was, and in such a short amount of time, with the characters that made me love them, that made me hate them, and from the beginning to the end, how they just changed in and of themselves, and it fit the book so well. But I was still screaming at the page like, don't you dare, and it still happened, and I just absolutely adored this book. Everybody please go buy it, please. It comes out November 6th in the UK, I think October 28th in the US. This is not a book to be sleeping on.